What's up, everybody? So this will be the second video, which this one will go over debugging using the Visual Studio Editor, or the IDE. And debugging is a very nice sort of tool to have when you are developing any code. So if you have taken 135, and possibly you might not have been exposed to any debuggers just yet, and when you were trying to fix your program. So you might have had a case where you were just going to see out, at different parts of your program, output the variable contents so you can see what's stored in this variable at this moment in your program. Now doing a see out like that isn't a very bad idea. I mean, you can still you can still debug your code just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is nicer to not have to always do couts all the time like that. So a debugger is a very nice tool that's going to basically tell you what the contents in the variables are. And also you can see what lines of the code are executed at this point. So it's pretty nice. So basically, as we already know, all your program code always starts from your int main, or your main, just like in C S135. So if you want to basically have a debugger run, you have to set a breakpoint in order to basically tell it that, okay, I want it to stop at a certain point in my program. So a breakpoint is simple as set. Using the mouse cursor on the left side in this gray area right there, you want to go to the line and put a red dot there, which means that the program will run, and when it hits that line of execution, it will stop right there. And then from there you can kind of see what's stored in your program, and of course you can sort of step by step run all your code, or you can sort of run it sort of line by line. Now let's go ahead and just run this and see what it does. So since you have a breakpoint, then you want to run your program in debug mode. So hitting F5 runs it in debug mode. Control F5 runs it sort of in normal mode, not that debug mode. So since we are going to have a breakpoint, we want to run this in debug mode for sure. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's hit F5. And okay, here's our prompt. And we're going to enter a number, so I'm going to enter 2. And the program stopped right there because, well, we set a breakpoint, so we wanted to stop, and we wanted to basically, we want to check the variable contents. So that's one nice thing about this debugger in the Visual Studio is we can see right here, we have all of our variables declared and it has some value associated with them. Now right now, these variables, our arrays, are all null because we didn't set an actual array to them just yet. But this variable amount cones contains the value 2. Which it should have because, well, we typed in 2 and hit enter, so I'm hoping that 2 was stored there. So it looks like it read it correctly and it converted it to integer correctly, so amount cones has been set correctly to the value 2. Perfect. So now if we want to go ahead and run the rest of the code, we can just go ahead and hit F5 and it'll just continue. So let's go ahead and just do that for right now. Let's just hit F5 to let it run, let it continue. So at this point, it'll run so it goes back to the terminal because typing F5, it basically just continued. So it has set all these values and it called get dimensions. So okay, fine. Let's go ahead and enter some dimensions in here. These might be, oops, it's wrong. It's bad. So this might be invalid numbers potentially, but I just want to just test this out. It might not be a valid, cone dimension, but that's okay though. I guess in this case, since we ran this in debug mode, the terminal ended right away. But I guess it just continued with the code. So, all right, that worked. But another idea would be what if I want to create? Let's say I want to make a breakpoint here, but I also want to see. I want to sort of debug this function. I want to know what this function actually does. I want to maybe trace it out line by line and check the actual values being stored in there accordingly, so I can also make sure this get cone dimensions works correctly as well. So to do that, I'm going to set a breakpoint on that function. So right here at get dimensions, I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint right there, which means that when it continues the execution of the program, when it jumps up to this function call, it will jump to this part of the code, and I want to go ahead and just see how this function actually performs. So let's go ahead and run this again. So I'm going to enter F5. All right. I'll enter 3 this time, so it's a bigger value, so we can sort of test this out. We can see the debuggers, what the debugger does. So let's enter 3. And okay, great. So there's all of our, so right now, this amount cones contains 3, so that's all good. Everything looks so far so good. Let's go ahead and continue. I'm going to just hit F5. And now we can see that, well, from here, from this spot, I hit F5, it just continued, and it called the function, so it jumped up over here to this area of my program. So that's where I am currently at this moment. Now right now, the variables from main are not showing here because right now, just like from 135, we're inside of this get cone dimension scope. So in this function scope, well, all we have really is just this cone heights, cone radii, and line. That's all we really have. So let's go ahead and sort of check out what's in this. Let's go ahead and run this function. Now, of course, I could just hit F5 and run the whole function, but what if I wanted to run it step by step to see what's really going on? Well, let's do that. So on the keyboard, if you look at F10, it will allow you to just sort of line by line run your code. So let's go ahead and do that right now. It's F10. It jumps down here. So we see we have our line declared. I is set to 0, as you can see here, as it should be. It checks the condition as how a for loop will work, and it will jump right here. So now it's on this line. It's going to do this work, which will output to the screen enter height and radius of cone 0, since I contains 0 at this point in time. So it outputs that to the screen. Hit F10 so you can check. It's going to show the updates. So actually not yet. Okay, that's fine. Let's go back here. So I'm going to hit F10, and it's going to pop up the terminal. Actually, I think it did show that. Maybe I'm just blind. So anyway, enter height. It's okay, fine. 2.5, 5.6. I hit enter. So we go to this. We can see here that line, this string line, contains these 2 strings, which is what it should contain because that's what I just read. That's what I just entered right here. So let's go ahead and just sort of check this. So cone heights index 0. So let's go ahead and just collapse this. So cone heights index 0 really doesn't contain anything right now, but it's going to contain something in a second. Let's hit F10 to run this line. It contains that number, the decimal 2.5. So just like as we expected. Then cone radii index 0 is going to store the value. Let's see here. It's going to store the value 5.6. So cone radii index 0 contains 5.6 as it should contain. So it looks like it's working just fine. Let's hit F10 and increments I by 1. Remember, that's how these for loops work. So it's going to always constantly jump to the top, increment this counter by 1, and it will check the condition to make sure it's still less than the length of the array. And then it will just go ahead and do all this. So I'm going to go ahead and just, do the rest of these. So 1.1, 8.9, hit enter. I'm just going to F10. I could hit F5 now and just stop all of this if I wanted to. But I'll go ahead now and just hit F10 once more. And now I'm going to go ahead and say, well, I'm pretty much convinced that it does work. So I'm going to try to hit Control F5 and see if it actually does go back to regular mode. I haven't tried this yet. Let's try this out. Control F5. Does it actually do anything? Oh, you must hit F5. So it has to be F5, and it will continue with the execution. So F5, I'll type that. I'll enter 4.5, 7.8, and the program is finished because I hit F5. So we could have had more breakpoints for more function calls if I wanted to test out and sort of verify each function if it's working or not. But I think this is a good enough sort of crash course on debuggers. That's basically all Debugger is mostly used for. You set breakpoints to stop the program at a certain point so you can check the contents of the variable in that situation, in that moment of your program's execution. And then you can, of course, run the code line by line just to make sure you can see what's happening. And of course, it does help for loops and complicated if-else statements. It will kind of jump around. It will jump to the line of code that the program is supposed to go to based on how you set up your statements and so forth. But I just sort of tested it on a loop on these loops. But you can, of course, when you do if statements, else's, you can see it also would jump around accordingly. So that was just the kind of video 1, video 2, or you can say really part 1, part 2 of the first lab type videos. This will basically give you a good idea to help you out with lab number 1, which we will have this coming Friday. So I guess till next time, take care and stay safe.